Hey everybody, hi. I think this is our moment to begin, and I'd like to welcome you to our continuation of dealing with this rather abstruse subject of being and everything that leads up to it. Of course, the word abstruse is abstruse in itself. And I'm recording this, and Michael Stacy is recording this, and we will have what we discuss and the meditation involved up on Makara as soon as may be possible. Meanwhile, just to welcome you, Annette and David and Heike, and I think it's Judy, and Joan, and Yohi or Johi from Korea, and Karen, and Lynn, hi, and Risto. And Joe Waltz is here with us too. So there are a few of us, and we can get into the subject. What I'd like to do is just begin with the great invocation. So basically, you leave your mute on and you leave your video off. And you can say it where you are aloud. It won't be broadcast. When they are broadcast, and everybody's saying them supposedly at the same time, it ends up being a very a staggered presentation. There's not much coherence to it. Or you can say it inside your own mind, but it is that great word of power. It's a great mantra for power and light. I don't know why the idea of love is left out of it. It's very present. Maybe it's just so general for anything that goes on within this solar system. So then the great invocation. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center, where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, thank you. And I'll switch here to a different little page, not wonderful in its formatting, but at least dealing with the 4 steps or the 3 steps on the way to an appreciation of being. This particular something, which is none of the aspects of divinity, it's not the first aspect of will, it's not the second aspect of love or the third aspect of intelligence. It's something that is the root of all of these 3 and of the attributes which are derived from the first 3 aspects. You know, if you put the first, second, and third aspect together in different combinations, you get the 4 attributes of divinity that we know as the rays of attribute, rays 4, 5, 6, or 7. But we learn that there are 4 gates to Shambhala, and the new esoteric schools, especially I think the advanced school, has 24 students and 3 experienced occultists. I don't know if we can call them teachers, but they're more than that. And there are different gates that allow you in. Now, sometimes I've thought that those gates are the planes of the cosmic physical plane. I think I'm only allowed so many of these. So we'll just see if I'm allowed this. Yeah. So somewhere here, we're going to take a look at the cosmic ethers. On this cosmic physical plane, the dense physical body of the solar logos is all of these 21 subplanes. And the etheric body is the 28 etheric planes or subplanes. And our spirituality is beginning with our effort to not only contact the egoic lotus and all of the valuable accumulation that we have garnered from millions of years of work in the lower quarries. You know, we're building King Solomon's temple here, and we have to have the stones that fit with right exactitude together. But spirituality just begins there, and it continues into the spiritual triad, which gives us the higher or abstract mind, still in the realm of the dense physical body of the solar logos. it gives us the Buddhic vehicle, one day to be completely organized, and probably after the third initiation, and especially active after the fourth initiation has been taken, and then it gives us the Atmic vehicle, which pertains very much to the fifth initiation. But really, we have not entered the realm of being until we enter the two truly esoteric subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. So these big solar planes are actually subplanes of the cosmic physical. And when we enter this monadic realm, the second plane, the plane of Surya or Vishnu, as it is known in the Hindu mythology, then we can begin really to identify as being. And up to that point, we're developing capacities which allow us to climb the ladder toward the recognition of being. And let's just say that when we reach the sea of fire, which is the topmost solar plane of the cosmic physical plane, then the volatile essence flies free, and we have truly entered the courts of Shambhala, where the Great Council is resident, and we have a still greater ability to identify with monadic awareness and with being. So it's really important that we understand the steps of the ladder. Now, maybe we get the idea that when we are focused in the egoic lotus, we have access to the light of the soul. You know, we might say those are the first three petals of the egoic lotus. And we might have then access to the love of the soul, which makes of us a socially responsible and caring member of society. Petals number 4, 5, and 6. And then the sacrificial will of the soul comes next. And those are the so-called petals of the mental plane, 7, 8, and 9. So those are three kinds of soul light or soul energy that we have to appropriate in order to build our Antakarana, our rainbow bridge, in the manner that Master DK instructed us to build. And then even in the egoic lotus, we get some idea of what synthesis is. I think there are two kinds of synthesis. One is the synthesis of utter sameness, which maybe comes later. And then there's the articulated synthesis, where we notice all kinds of differences and distinctions, but we also realize that there is a certain sameness of being underlying all the differentiated perceptions which normal life on whatever plane may give to us. So from these 9 petals are springing up because of the energy of the lowest aspect of the spiritual triad, the abstract mind. The 3 synthesis petals, synthesis, intelligent synthesis, loving synthesis, willful synthesis, are springing up from a stream of energy coming from the Buddhic plane, and maybe some of the Atmic. The central jewel in the lotus, and every one of those little marks is probably important. I don't know if there's 24, but if there were, it would make sense, because 24 is the number of Shambhala, and basically it is the directness of the monad which has created the jewel in the lotus from the will aspect, going straight to the higher mental plane. And that is sometimes called the highest will of the soul, but it's also the representation of the monad upon the higher mental plane of soul. So, in a way, our very first stop is to enter this quasi-spiritual world, which is still in the dense physical body of the solar logos, and maybe, I don't know, we might be able to say it's in the dense physical body of our planetary logos, or maybe to the planetary logos it has some kind of etheric meaning. But to the solar logos, our causal body, our solar temple, is definitely in his dense physical body. But we have to move higher than that on our way to the appreciation of what being really is, and it's just so very subtle. Now we know that the causal body, the egoic lotus, is sometimes considered the heart center of the monad. And why that's important in the study of being, or identifying as being, is that the heart must be open in order for the apprehension of the nature of being to occur. If you just try to do it with your head, it will be useful, but not final. So we need something more. We need a heart, and there are a number of parts available to us between the shoulder blades, at the top of the head, on the etheric levels, at the top of the head, on the astral levels, and then the egoic lotus itself. And even the monad is considered to be 12-fold, which again makes a lot of sense in the series from 6 to 12 to 24. Those are all shambhalic monadic numbers. So we have to approach this subject with the heart. Not that we become sentimental about it, it's just that that particular organ of inclusiveness allows us in to what we might call the substance of being, or the way being stands beneath all things, stands under all things. Now, the heart center, if you go to page 517 of Esoteric Astrology, you'll see that for disciples and initiates, the heart center is ruled by Jupiter. And that's very interesting because Jupiter also rules the monadic plane in the table of creative hierarchies. So Jupiter, the heart, takes us into the monad. This is what I'm really trying to say. Every once in a while you have to nail down a statement about which you can be fairly sure. And Neptune has something to do with it as well. Jupiter and Neptune, both of them rulers of Pisces. The monad basically, on its mission, it's a mission of salvation of lower forms of life. So both Jupiter and Neptune are involved. And when you come to the liberated monad, And who, the Christ will know what that's all about, and the Buddha. All we can do is speculate. When you come to the liberated monad in the sea of fire, it is such planets as the sun, which is not really a planet at all, that star, and Uranus, and maybe Vulcan as well. So what we're looking for is higher and higher identifications with being, or as being. We know that the Hindus are very particular about discriminating concerning different categories of samadhi. Samadhi is an exalted contemplative state in which you are in a state of bliss pretty much, and there is an identification with the essence of things. Maybe some of you are familiar with Ramakrishna, the great teacher of the 19th century in India, and there were photographs in those days, and it shows him in a state of samadhi. He looks pretty happy. Well, more than happy. He looks blissful. So when we get up to the logoic plane, it's even beyond the monadic. But what we want to begin to do here is think our way into an approach to being. We want to intuit our way as an approach to being. We want to will our way as an approach to being. And then we want to slip into monadic awareness, which we can talk about, but the question is, do we know anything about it, really? And slipping into that, have a direct experience of what being really is. And that would take us quite far enough. Now, all that would begin at the third initiation and simply intensify as we went along. All right, so those are some thoughts which I think bear repeating, because after all, they are rather abstruse, and DK is not emphasizing them so much. But remember, we are pursuing two curricula, and one of them is on the science of relationships, in which Master DK is a profound expert. And he kind of doesn't emphasize the other part of the curriculum, which is the science of non-relationship, or the science of being. Thinking, that if we're ready for that, we'll somehow pick up the hints here and there and be able to enter into it. Now, I thought to myself, can we define these things, and do we know what they're really all about? So, do we know what an abstract thought really is? The lowest level of the spiritual triad, which is still within the dense physical body of the solar logos, is the vibratory level on which the monastic permanent atom finds its place. Not the mental unit in the concrete mind, but the monastic permanent atom finds its place. And when we have the proper exercise of the monastic permanent atom, we will have a mental vehicle, even though the causal body should disappear. But an abstract thought is not necessarily a complex thought. You can get some very complex thoughts on the level of the concrete mind. Now, just think about that for a minute. You know, when you're studying medicine or some branch of physics or some really demanding discipline, chemistry, goodness, some of those chemical formulas just go on and on and on with all kinds of links to them. They are concrete designations. They are not abstract thoughts. So it seems to me that on the way of stepping towards being, we need to take a look at what the spiritual triad produces, what the triadal vehicles, once they are organized, begin to give us in terms of consciousness. So I have a little meditation for us that will allow each of us to think about abstract thinking. And if we had that sort of golden thread connecting our mental, the highest part of the concrete mind, to the soul, we would begin to have the soul illumined mind, or the mind held steady in the light, or we would have the mind as it is in Christ, the loving mind, the Son of Mind, the Venus mind. We would have that. And, you know, when you get into the arcane school, in a way, that's the very first thing that we're being taught. You know, we're working with the master in the heart. Which is one day becomes the actual presence of the master, or at least the ideal self. So let's just imagine that our normal mental process is filled with light. And that somehow we can see life from a soul perspective. And can somehow realize that every human being that we encounter is really a soul more than a personality. So we begin to discern soul in everyone, whether we know that individual personally or not. And eventually we begin to realize that there is one consciousness, really, and no my soul, thy soul, but only the soul. We also begin to use the higher mind, which is, I like to call it sometimes unitive mind to think our way towards abstract mind. In other words, once we are somewhat established in the mind held steady in the light, we begin to search after the bigger picture, which embraces much more and which the Son of Mind can lead us towards. And that would be the testimony of the abstract mind. And if we follow, there's about 100 pages in the book, The Rays and the Initiations, where DK is teaching us how to build the Antikarana in yet another way with words of power for the different rays. Now you would use your soul ray word of power, but when working in a group, the multicolored Antikarana would emphasize the color indigo. And you would reach toward the abstract mind through an act of projection, and you would say to yourself mantrically, I see the greatest light. From the mental unit, you would project the energies you have abstracted from the soul, and you would think, I see the greatest light. And I oftentimes use the note G to sound the Om because it's one of the second ray notes when the scale begins on the note C. So let's project that line of light across the bridge toward the monastic permanent atom, just to make the picture as clear as possible. We'd go all the way to the very first diagram, and here we would have the line of projection from the mental unit on the highest level of the concrete mind to the monastic permanent atom on the highest level of the higher mind. So we gather a lot of energies from the soul and we project them using the mantra, I see the greatest light. And we'll sound the Om outwardly 3 times as we say to ourselves, I see the greatest light. We just kind of hold the idea that from the place of unfettered enlightenment, which is Shambhala, and through the monastic permanent atom, something of this greatest light descends. And it's very subtle, and we can begin to touch it. Now, we're making application to the area where, in general, wisdom is found. Wisdom technically belongs to the Buddhic plane, but it is shared, the wise will, the wise mind, and of course, the wisdom which is Buddhi, and which sees all things as they are in the intuition, or we can call it the pure reason. But for now, and we'll do different things at different times, next time we get together, we'll focus on the Buddhi. This time we're going to focus on the abstract mind. Just find yourself, even if imaginatively, coming into rapport with the abstract mind. I sometimes call it planetary mind, as it has such a potential vastness. But it's not so much interested in the concrete details as in relationships between a few factors which contain in themselves many concrete instances. Now, let me repeat that. It's not so much interested in concretions, forms, and such. The abstract mind is a mind which reveals relationships between certain factors which are abstractions and which contain many concrete instances of things, but in the abstract mind there is a revelation of what all of these concrete instances share, what they all share. For instance, if we look at a bunch of different squares of all different kinds, the abstraction there is that they all share 4 90-degree angles. Whether they're big squares, little squares, colored squares, whatever, made of wood, made of metal, made of any substance, their squareness is what we notice. They all have 4 90-degree angles. And if we consider triangles, there are so many different kinds: equilateral, isosceles, scalene, with different types of angles, all summing eventually to 180 degrees. They're very different. They can be made out of different materials: wood, metal, any concrete thing. Material can make a triangle, but what is the triangleness in those many specific instances? The fact that there are 3 vertices, all connected, and that the interior angles of a triangle always sum to 180 degrees. That's the triangleness, the abstraction within the concrete instances of triangles. So you're looking for something that all the concrete instances share. Another example might be the old first sentence of a famous syllogism. It goes, "All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal," is probably the foremost syllogism. There are men, human beings of all categories, sizes, shapes, weight, color, whatever, health, ill health, good health, whatever. But they all share in common mortality. That's the abstraction. Abstraction means to reach in and lift out something, let's say, in this case, identical in all the instances. So there is the concrete mind, and it may study just one particular thing. And it begins then to generalize towards other things that are like the one thing studied. And pretty soon, you will have a formula which applies to all of them. And let's just say that the Einsteinian formula is only one such instance. We're not just talking about one beam of light, we're talking about many beams of light. And we're not just talking about one specific energy, we're talking about many types of energy. E equals mass. It can be a mass of any kind. C, the speed of light, squared to the exponent 2. It applies to all mass. So then the question comes up, have we ever really thought abstractly? Because, as I say, we're capable of saying, oh, that's a very complicated thought. I mean, I don't understand, some of those organic molecules just go on and on with their links. Extremely complex. You kind of wonder how they ever figure it out. But in dealing with them, you're not dealing with an abstraction. You're dealing with complicated concretion. And so basically what I have to say is that complicated concretion is not abstraction and is often mistaken for such. So again, we've looked a little bit at the Antakarana here, and we've projected, and a great beam of light is enhancing the monastic permanent atom and what it can offer. So I'm going to ask you, you'll probably need, either a pen or you'll need just to be typing on your computer. That might do it. Think now of one abstract thought, a thought that you think is an abstract thought of the kind that would be produced by the function of the true mental vehicle in whose center would be the monastic permanent atom. Let's just meditate on that for a minute, a few minutes, and think. See if you can come up with what you consider to be an abstract thought. I won't, force you to repeat it, but maybe some will be interested in offering their abstract thought, what they think is such an abstract thought. So let's meditate on this. Keeping the alignment we have visualized. So, it's a little self-testing to see whether we are really exercising the abstract mind or whether we're simply engaged with the concrete mind, or whether maybe in between we have some kind of testimony of the unitive mind, the higher mind, above the concrete mind, above, not really, but above the concrete mind and below the abstract mind. So, yeah, the squeaking sound is my table. There's nothing I can do about it. That's the squeak. But, a squeak is a great concretion, isn't it? And I do agree with this from Heike that says an abstract thought form can come as a symbol full of meaning, which then has to unfold into language or thought lines in order to translate it into concrete thinking. So the abstract mind can produce symbols which contain many concretions and details regarding those concretions. It's a small thing, which is really a large thing, and its power to contain is immense, and yet in itself it can be very simple. I mean, there are so many specifics that we can get out of the 5-pointed star, the 6-pointed star, the cross, the triangle, the various platonic solids, some more complex than others, but all with a great power of containment. So we can have abstract thoughts which can be symbolized, or we can have abstract thoughts which are expressed in words, sometimes poetic words. Now, a little more here. Jesse is writing that the abstract mind is more about vibrations and energies, which require certain sensitivities to understand. Aren't you speaking about the principle of triangles? Principle is an abstraction with many concrete instances demonstrating that principle in action. Abstraction is a type of, yes, simplicity is a good idea when dealing with the concept of abstraction. The easiest abstract thought is love. Well, that's a big one, and that's an abstraction in itself. And maybe it's easy for some and much more difficult for first-ray monadic types, and easiest for second-ray monadic types. As far as vibrations and energies go, they can be very concrete. And we can measure these things even within the dense physical body of the planetary logos or solar logos, or within our own dense physical body. So the word vibration and the word energies, I think, should not be only related to high states. Everything carries its own vibration, and it can be a very concrete numerical frequency. In other words, the concrete mind can deal with that as well, a well-trained concrete mind. At least this is my opinion. Is it possible to question something about which you know absolutely nothing about? Well, is there anything about which we know absolutely nothing if we retreat to the inner source of wisdom, which is identical in all of us? In other words, at a certain level of altitude, vibrational altitude maybe, we are all omnipresent, we are all omniscient, and we are all omnipotent. But those potencies cannot work through into the much constricted emanations which proceed from the state of all-knowingness, all presence, and all power. See, so basically, we have to strip away the conviction that we know what we are, and that we even know what we know. We know essentially much more, infinitely more, actually, infinitely more, always infinitely more than we think we know, because we're just dealing with ourself as some kind of limited extension of the one being. When we return consciously to being the one being, we will realize that there's nothing about which we know absolutely nothing. And in general, you know, when you start to use the triadal abilities, even the things that personality mind doesn't know anything about, you know, personality mind can be very limited, will begin to open up, and unsuspected knowledges that have always been resident within our inner capacities will begin to appear. So not only do we know everything in our ultimate state, but we are everything. And this, of course, takes us back to the Vedanta. Coming from the Vedas, it takes us into an ultimate state that I call absoluteness, beingness, the absolute, that beyond which there is nothing, and it is a pointless state. And I can, I'd like to elaborate on that at some point. There are different kinds of points. Okay, let's see what we got here. All energies have sound. It's just that the instrument for detecting the sound of any frequency or vibration do not exist for man. But there's nothing that vibrates, and there is no energy that does not vibrate, but has sound appreciable on some level of sensitivity. It's just like Shambhala in a different way. You say, well, I don't see a thing. It's all black. Well, that's because we don't have the organ or organs to sense unfettered enlightenment of the kind that exists in Shambhala. And I would say, Johi, that great classical music and other great music too came from the abstract mind. You say, I would take it even further, okay, Johi? I would say that it came from the buddhi, the intuition. Now, one of my, in other words, the next level of the triad. One of my favorite examples is Johann Sebastian Bach, who was not only an Aries, he was Pisces Aries. And so very interestingly, I consider him the master musician of Germany. And his sun sign is the same as the sign of the German soul, and his stellium, or grouping of planets in the 10th house of career, is the same as the Pisces personality of Germany. Now, wherever Bach got his music from, it was all mathematically worked out, but the impression came through the moon, Neptune, Venus, and Mercury, all together in Pisces at the top of the chart. It's a hugely Buddhic indication, intuitive, and it has loads of heart and unity in it. The love energy is profound. So something above the abstract mind is needed to create the most wonderful music. There are those, of course, who might know some formulas and they just write it out. And when I was in music school 50 years ago or more than that, I was in Aspen, Colorado, and the Milhaud lived there, Milhaud, and he was a well-known composer, and she a drama coach. And I believe that his way of writing music, he could just write on the wall, whatever came to him. It was more from the abstract mind. In my view, it did not have the profundity of intuitive truth that Bach's music has, that Beethoven's music has, that Brahms' music has, the three great Bs of Germany. So you need the heart in it, and the buddhi provides the heart, the central point in the spiritual triad. Okay, so a kind of knowing, vibrations can leave knowing with anyone, the advancing human being, but also the planetary logos and the solar logos, who are great composers. Now, if you read the Tibetan, we understand that our solar logos is composing a solar sonata, which will be revealed in completion at the end of the composition period. Our planetary logos is working on some kind of symphony, and all of us are the notes in that, notes and phrases. Yes, the synthesia, or yes, I met some people who, like the devas, they see sound and they hear color. Yes, and this will be a fourth ray ability that will grow in strength, but we just don't know how many different kinds of ears there are. Every sense perception in man exists in the higher beings only on a much higher turn of the spiral. So they hear, they see, and maybe they can reverse it in, the synthesia or synthesia, however that should be spoken. They see these things that are complete non-events to us because we are not. Yes, Scriabin is one. That's right, indeed. Yeah, Scriabin, a Capricorn man, and he was able to deal with this reversal of sight and sound. But our sensitivity right now is very curtailed. We just have to realize that the whole universe is music from one perspective, and that the greatest master musician of all is the universal logos. I'm gonna turn to a musical. There's lots of musical hints in Master DK. Dealing with the fundamental, the perfect third of the developed personality, the fifth of the soul, and the octave of the monad. But it all reaches a great climax, and it's found in a treatise on cosmic fire. And I wonder if it's found at the very end. I hope I can find it, because I'm not sure. It's all about a great composition. 1281, maybe it's too much. Okay, these are stanzas, and let's see. Yeah, it's called Finale. Okay, so now what I'll do is change my screen, and here it is. And you'll see how the whole thing sums up in a musical description. So when any great system comes to an end, and we could apply this to the universal system, the morning stars sang in their courses. The great paean of creation echoeth yet, and arouseth the vibration. There comes cessation of the song when perfection is achieved. When all are blended into one full chord, the work is done. Dissonance in space soundeth yet. Discord ariseth in many systems. When all is resolved into harmony, when all is blended into symphony, the grand chorale will reverberate, to the uttermost bounds of the known universe, it implies there is also the unknown universe, then will occur that which is beyond the comprehension of the highest Chohan, the marriage song of the heavenly man. So there is the musical finale described in relation to our own planetary logos. And of course, this whole idea goes much beyond that as well. And one of the very first things to be revealed under the incoming fourth ray will be the relationship between that which sight reveals, color, the notes appropriate to those colors. And I have a feeling that Germany and Austria, with their strong fifth ray as well as fourth, they have fourth ray souls, will be involved in revealing this to humanity. And of course, yes, when we reach the Ninth Symphony and the Choral Symphony, you know, many people have tried to write that 10th Symphony, they always die. Something happens. It happened to Mahler, and it happened to Beethoven. They couldn't get into the 10th Symphony, but one of the great works of Buddhic art is the Choral Symphony of Beethoven, the Ninth Symphony especially. It's, again, the fourth movement, isn't it? So that number 4 with the new Renaissance is going to reveal many things to us. Outstanding things. Let's see if I can, okay, so now, but, well, maybe we're off the track and maybe we're not. It is of great interest, this whole question of vibration. Yeah. And we are very, thus far, insensitive. And to bring it back to the subject, everything is either in the universal state or the supra-universal state, but we're very far from registering all that is. Let me give you, I have an abstract thought. It's along the third ray line. Maybe I should write it out, but I don't want to take the time. Just listen carefully and see if you think it is an abstract thought. The content of every universe is reducible to a true point, which is dimensionless yet existent until absorbed by absoluteness. Now, it's really hard, you know, to put your finger on anything there. They're all abstractions. But what I'm trying to say is that any perception of any kind, all perceptions of any kind, are reducible to the same identical dimensionless point, the magnitude of which is the ultimate infinitesimal. So this is going to get us into some of the higher mathematics. You can't point to concrete things that are specific examples of what is said here, but you can point to all things as self-perceptions which are reduced to the ultimate infinitesimal, which has no dimension whatsoever and yet exists. Now, you know, it would take some unbundling of that kind of thought, but I can assure you it's coming out of the abstract tendency. And, you know, people who are very strongly sharp in the concrete mind will say, well, there's nothing here. You know, how do you measure this? Interesting that the word Maya, one of its definitions, means that which is measurable. So every universe is, in a sense, measurable and myopic, but reduces itself at the close of its manifestation to the immeasurable and non-myopic and therefore absolute. Now, these are, you know, philosophical abstractions pretty much on the third ray. The thing we want to assure ourselves of, however, is that the abstract mind is working for us and not just some kind of complexification which the concrete mind can produce. And of course, one can begin with symbols. In the Glamour book, or with the Glamour group, the observers of reality, the second group, Master DK had them study symbols and interpret them. And the interpretation was a Mercurian act which brought the manifold contents of the symbol into a more explicit, definite presentation. You can carry a lot of symbols with you. The question is, do you know how to break them down so that they translate into something that the lower aspect of mind recognizes and about which you can, as it were, do something or act upon? Is there anybody that would like to offer an abstract thought? I mean, it's quite a challenge, actually. Here is someone, Jessie, she's saying, or he's, I'm not sure. Let's see what we have here. Other things have been added. I'll just go in order. Our thoughts also go out as sound. Well, every thought has sound, vibration, and color. You know, I mean, basically, DK in Cosmic Fire gives the sequence of 1 through 4 this way: vibration, light, sound, color. There's nothing that is conceived or produced in the magical process or by mind that does not have those 4 kind of dimensions, if we can use the word dimension in a different sense. So our thoughts go out, and you say, in realizing the harmonic or disharmonic sound, we learn to send out the right thoughts. Well, it's true. I mean, the notes of the thought we may be thinking or sounding will reveal harmony or disharmony. A lie, for example, has very disharmonic sound and effect, and that is also true because the truth resonates to certain frequencies and sets up a pattern of relationship, and we get with a lie some degree of cacophony or dissonance. Now, all the things you're talking about here, you know, you're coming from a Ray 4 country here, Heike. All of these things are ultimately measurable and mathematically measurable. That's why we're told a very interesting thing about the 4th ray, that it is the ray of mathematical exactitude. So, in fact, when we're talking about harmony, we're talking about exact mathematics. And the slightest deviation from a harmonious vibrational relationship is detectable and even painful to people who are strongly influenced by the fourth ray. And sometimes we say, well, in another way, we say, it doesn't ring true. And I had an old teacher once who basically said, who put the crack in the Liberty Bell? There is a bell emblematic of freedom in the United States, but it has a big crack in it and it cannot sound as it should. So be very vibrationally aware. And one of our big tasks is to bring into harmony the many, many conditions that surround us. And how is harmony achieved? By reflecting with as much exactitude as possible archetypal relationships on the highest planes. We always need harmony between the condition and the archetype, or between Saturn and Uranus. At one point, Master Moria said that all of Armageddon, the great battle, is a battle between Saturn and Uranus. Conditions are things as they have become. Archetypes are those same patterns of relationships as they should be and have been conceived in the mind of the chief hyparxis or hierarch of the system. Okay. Other things. Reality, and now, let me just say, here we have Anne Veronica talking about the one. And what is the difference between the one and the zero? This is a difficult question. Is reality a one, or is it an absolute zero? I don't mean a temperature measurement there, but I mean a completely pointless, formless state, which is all potential and all containing. And in fact is, well, I'll dare to say it, infinitely greater than absolute infinitude. Okay, well, the big word reality comes out here. And reality is not form. Reality, I don't think we can define it, but it's absoluteness has been the word. The irreducible, the causeless cause, that which has always and forever been, without any form in it whatsoever, and yet responsible for all form, all distinction, all division, all states, and yet itself informal, non-formal, without distinction, without states, without points, and maybe the slightest bit perceivable amidst the many distinctions which illusion offers us. See, is there anything else here? Yes, yes, vibration, light, sound, color, each to do with higher planes, especially the first four of any sevenfold plane. It's always the first four that are of great interest because they are the etheric and causal source of what appears on the lower three. But right here on our very simple cosmic or its systemic physical plane, we also have the same that can be approached by the concrete mind: vibration, light, sound, and color. And those are differently arranged. Sometimes you have a series in which sound comes first, but none of them is reality. They are all the products of reality, the extensions of reality, the emanations of reality. They are not reality itself. Reality is not really definable. You can drive yourself crazy trying to define it, but maybe come closer and closer and never really grasp it. It is ungraspable. And this is an interesting thought, that reality is non-existent. Well, if you do that with lowercase, what we normally consider reality is non-existent. The one thing about absoluteness, if we call it reality, we don't have to call it anything, but absoluteness is ever existent and without cause. Now that's an abstract thought. That absoluteness is ever existent and causeless, because there is nothing else. You always need a second in order to cause what is before your eyes. Let's say you're focusing on reality, but there is nothing else. So you have not that second, which is the cause. You have to say, in a way, it's the cause of itself. Reality is the cause of itself, but in another way, the whole idea of causality becomes non-existent or useless. It simply is forever, and it is the one without a second, not a second of time, but the one without ordinarily a second or a third or a fourth, So these, we're hanging out now in the realm of the abstract mind. Okay, now some people will say, well, how can you prove that? And all I can say is that the next stratum, the next level, the Buddhic level, will intuitively present truth in such a way that it is self-evident and need not be proven in the conventional sense. Alone and all one. See, you can play with words, and they do tell you a lot. I mean, look at these words: evil, veil, vile, and live. Evil, veil, vile, live. They're all permutations of the same letters. And you can make a story out of it, that when illusion comes forth into livingness, a veil is dropped upon reality. Evil appears because it is limitation, and that limitation is vile to the self-perception of the true inner being. So, the Kabbalists used to play with this, with numbers and letters and so forth, and they became, they came upon some revelations by doing that. It's a very third-ray method of approach. Is it possible that absoluteness is always becoming? Well, in illusion, it becomes. I would say that absolute infinity, which is a super universal state, is always becoming, but as far as absoluteness, it's ultimately the same forever. That's my grasp. There is no movement, no distinction, no relationship in absoluteness. It is non-relational because it is completely homogeneous. It has no parts, no points. And becoming, consider the world of becoming, it always has to have divisions so that they can be rearranged, recombined in what we call becoming. Now, in Greek philosophy, there are two terms, the world of being and the world of becoming. The world of being is archetypal. The world of becoming is conditional. And I sometimes call it the Mosaic world, the world of Moses. You know, you look at all the parts and pieces from a distance and they seem to make one seamless picture, but you get up close and they are only representations of the archetype. They are not the archetype itself. Yet that's what we have to do, even in our own individual life, is represent the archetype. That's what we have to do. And thus recreate the lower worlds to reflect the higher worlds. I think, Francis is going through this, Francis Donald, and the Big Manly Hall book about the encyclopedia of Masonic, symbolic, Masonic, Kabbalistic, Rosicrucian philosophy. I always get those words mixed up, but it's the big book. It's really big. And there is a picture of the great man above the water and his inverted reflection within the water. The great man, is he called the Macrosopus, something like that. He is the archetype, and the reflection is simply that, the reflection of the archetype. But if we could make our outer life reflect the archetypal worlds, we'd be doing quite well, and we'd be doing what is expected of us. Well, yes, look at it. When you talk about the absoluteness or absolute, I'm sure that the conception of a planetary logos as to what this is much in advance of our conception. But I have the sense that every registration of what the absolute is infinitely removed from what it really is, even if conceived by the greatest possible, though limited, being. So, we've got a universal logos, which is a limited being, which means really that it is nothing but an ultimate point, an infinitesimal. Now, compare that with absolute infinitude. It's ungraspable what the absolute is. You can only grasp what has no infinite extension. You can't wrap your hand around it. You can't do the Vulcan thing and seize it in your fist. It is ever elusive. So certainly what the Solar Logos thinks, as the Solar Logos does think, of the absolute is probably far different than what we can. And what even the universal Logos, the God of the entire universe, thinks of the nature of the absolute is, well, not infinitely beyond what we can think, but so far beyond that we can say nothing about it. And yet, compared to absoluteness, it is an infinitesimal, which means the ever smaller thing, the ever lessening, though still existing something. Words, of course, fail. The ever lessening, though still existing something. Our big danger, of course, is to put all of these higher concepts in terms of the concepts that humanity has worked out. You have to kind of make them more flexible. Otherwise, you will try to contain the uncontainable. Well, inevitably, when we do this kind of work together, we are dealing at first with the abstract mind, triadal mind. Maybe the intuition is something different because it carries the conviction of unalterable truth. And it probably is felt in the heart and is not just speculative. It's a revelation of truth. Pure reason is quite different from reasoning. And when Immanuel Kant wrote his critique of pure reason, it wasn't about the pure reason of the occultist. It was about the reasoning of the mind, which is different from the sudden impartation of straight knowledge, which is the pure reason of the Buddhic plane. Well, okay. Our understanding is always changing, hopefully for the better. If it's for the better and the wider, it's the process of going into ever new states of consciousness, which we can call initiation, going into the new, starting an entirely new type of perception on and on and on and on until it stops with the self-perception of the universal logos, and even then it doesn't stop. Because when any universe dissolves, we're into a trans-universal state of the absolute deity. And, we can't really talk about it except that when it registers itself, at least in my view, it registers itself as absolute infinity, which is still not yet absoluteness because it is articulated, meaning has parts and pieces and relations. As for absoluteness, it has no parts, pieces, divisions, and relations. We're evolving a different language here, and it is important that we do so and that everyone evolve his or her own language for the realities. I'm giving you what I have evolved, and it's always in flux, and maybe new insights come. The important thing is that we actually experience these things rather than just talk about them. But talking about them is important too, and maybe can lead to the experience. Now, Michael, have I missed anybody who has written something substantive?
I think you've covered all of the comments, yes.
Okay. All right, well, today's work was on the abstract mind. And I'll tell you what, you have some time. I don't mean right now, but write down for yourself some of what you consider to be abstract thoughts and test them out. Are they really abstract thoughts? Because look, for the next 2,000 years, which is the sub-6 of 5, namely that we're in the 5th root race and we're heading into the 6th sub-race of the 5th root race, the emphasis will be upon developing the abstract mind, and not yet the intuition, which will be more the product of the larger 6th root race. We're still in the 5th root race, but the entering the 6th section of it. So that's going to be our education in the abstract mind for 2,000 years and maybe beyond. So sit down with yourself sometime in a meditative mood and line up with your antikarana work and say, okay, now I'm looking to express an abstract statement, which is the product of the abstract mind and the monastic permanent atom, and see what comes up for you or comes down. You never know. Something will appear. And then, probably one of the revelations that will happen is that we will realize how very seldom we actually use the abstract mind. We can talk about it a lot, but it'll probably be revealed that only very seldom are we actually involved in, he's called it the higher mathematics, the higher philosophy, all of those kinds of things. Although theosophy does give us a good opportunity to work in that realm. And then maybe we'll get an idea of where our mental activities are usually pitched, whether concrete, whether son of mind, whether higher mind, son of mind and higher mind, same thing really, or abstract mind. And there are other types of mind too, we'll get into it, but the intuitive mind is called the transcendental mind. It's a very Mercurian kind of thing, and it also deals with Jupiter and Neptune. Transcendental. And then eventually you'll get into the Buddha mind, which is the mind and law together. It's an atmic spiritual will kind of mode of mind. Well, you would expect that mind would have to extend up to the fifth cosmic subplane from below. The number 5 and mind just go hand in hand. Okay, so before we leave off now, are there any questions? I'm not going to go into it too much because we've spent quite a bit of time, and if we, get overloaded, then maybe it all just falls off the plate, Okay, well, just to say, tomorrow morning, the glamour meditation and some discussion of what's in the glamour book, 5 a.m. GMT. We're reading through the glamour book. It's very practical and helps us see through the distortions which motivate many human beings and, probably ourselves as well. And then by the evening, we'll be doing Cosmic Fire in depth. And it has some relation to what we're talking about here, but basically we're studying the aspects of the secret doctrine as presented in the beginning of the Cosmic Fire book. And then as we proceed, we'll be into fire by friction, solar fire, and finally electric fire. But the main portion of the book, and it'll take a long time to get there, is the solar fire part. It's really a book on solar fire, but it'll take a little while before we can do that. So let's get practical. And as we sign off, and we'll use the 5 o'clock mantra, but of course you can use it anytime. I have trouble with my computer. Oh, may the power. Well, I'm hoping that I can get there from here. Yeah, that's it. Okay. We'll say this together and we'll use the word we instead of I. And basically,
You need to change your screen share.
oh, good.
See
And
that.
thank you for notifying me, because I do tend to forget that, you know, and then I have trouble. So now you should see it.
There it is.
Okay, thank you. So let's say this together using the word we for the last sentence. May the power of the one life pour through the group of all true servers. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. May we fulfill our parts in the one work through self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Michael, for your assistance, and we'll just proceed, learning as we go. And we'll see at least some of you probably tomorrow morning, at least morning here in Europe, for the glamour work. Okay, lots of love, many blessings. Thank you for being here. And this will show up on Makara in not too long a time, I would guess. We'll talk to you later then. Bye-bye.